Hey, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Tanisha.
Connected to desktop empty chat 0.
All right, so I think someone heard me. All right.
Desktop empty chat 0 disconnected. Ready to pair. Connected to desktop empty chat 0.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yes, Tanisha.
Oh, yay. Hey, Eric, how are you doing today?
Good. Good to see you again.
You too. I'm always
Happy
happy to have you
Friday.
guys. Yes. I think this is my first Friday back from vacation, so I'm ready for the weekend.
Yeah, funny how that is.
All right, it is 12 o'clock, so I will be respectful of everyone's lunch hours and go ahead and get started. Our guest today, we've spoken with before. He is the Chief Cybersecurity Strategist for Cyber Resilience at Microfocus. Do I have that right?
You do.
All right, awesome. His name is Eric, is it Popile?
Popiel, you were close.
Popile. Okay, cool. So he's going to be talking to us about data privacy and protections today. So I will go ahead and hand it off to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Tanisha. Hey, good to talk to you guys again. We're actually, while I am, as Tanisha mentioned, in charge of kind of the entire portfolio for Microfocus division called CyberRes, which really focuses on cyber resiliency. Which covers a pretty broad ground, right? So it's kind of like you're master of none but know everything kind of thing, however that phrase goes. But so you got to know a lot about a lot of stuff at the end of the day, depending on what senior executive you're talking about and what he wants to talk about at that given moment. However, today we're actually going to talk about one of my most passionate topics, which is data privacy and protection. And I say this because, my background, I go back a ways. I know I'm younger than I look, older than I look, I guess is the right way to put it. So I actually go back to the COBOL mainframe days, way back in the mid 80s or so. I was a application developer for a very large bank at the time called Great Western Bank, which has since been acquired by a number of people. And so, back then as an application developer, both in the banking, retail, financial, insurance industries, data protection was kind of interesting back then because it was really more about how do you secure your four walls, right? And I remember I used to actually sit right outside the server room where the mainframe was. And so, security back then was, how do I get through the door to mount my tapes back in the day, right? Which most of you probably don't remember, but some of you may do. But back in the day, you had to actually, as a programmer, you had to kind of do your own stuff, and that was security back then. That was application security. So it's come a long way since then, for sure. But data privacy and protection, I've been in the information management and governance space, which covers data privacy and protection as well, for almost 20 years now. So about 18 years plus in this particular space before taking this cybersecurity strategist role just almost 2 years ago now. So With that, I'll kind of kick it off. Feel free to ask questions along the way. I'll try to answer them as much and as many as I possibly can. But certainly, if we need to move on, I'll reserve the right to do so, type of thing. I have the cursor, so I guess I'm in charge. All right, so I am going to, let's see, try to share my screen. And let me know if you guys can see that.
Yes, sir.
Awesome, perfect. All right, I would love to, there we go. Okay, perfect. All right, so data privacy and protection. This is kind of an interesting topic, and I'll have a couple interesting kind of slides here at the beginning to kind of set the stage, so to speak, of why this is such a big problem and topic to solve and why everybody wants to talk about it. And I'll even touch upon that a little bit in the end in kind of a personal way. So, you know, when we look at, I found this slide kind of fascinating when I was putting together a presentation a couple months ago, of the number of people that are hopping on the internet. And so, you know, this is really pre-pandemic as well. And so if you think about how the world has changed over the last 2 years, you know, this was a madness before the pandemic. And now with the pandemic, it's, you know, even more so. It's become kind of crazy how many people are hopping on the internet literally every minute across the globe. And so when you look at, you know, the kind of the trends that are out there in the various industry, according to, you know, CISOs I talk to, CIOs, analysts, and so on, there's kind of a really two big pieces here that I think stand out. And certainly, you know, when you look at, you know, movement to the cloud, I mean, that's a no-brainer. Everybody's kind of got projects around movement to the cloud. They've got movements around cloud analytics platforms like Snowflake and others. You know, obviously, you know, with the global workforce growing and also now working from home as well, in many cases. We here at Microfocus are still mostly working at home as well. We just recently opened a couple key offices across the US, but the requirements to actually get back into an office are kind of so stringent that it just doesn't make sense yet. So, but nonetheless, I'd say, you know, 95, 98% of us are still home. And so, you know, we're also, companies are looking on how to monetize various industries as well, and data and so on. And so when you look at a lot of these things, the two that kind of stand out to me is global data privacy and protecting the crown jewels. And the reason I have global data privacy highlighted and protecting the crown jewels not is, you know, protecting the crown jewels has been a concept and a priority for a long time, right? But what's really been interesting in this particular market space is, you know, protecting the crown jewels used to be kind of easy, right? If you think back, like almost to the Knights of Templar or the Round Table or anything like that, you know, you had a castle and you had a knight who essentially protected the crown jewels. It was really easy because all the crown jewels were in the deepest, darkest vault, and all you had to do was build a big enough, strong enough castle and have a good enough force to protect it. You know, really wasn't a problem. The problem now is, though, that data is everywhere. And so not only is it's no longer just in that deep, dark vault, it's on everybody's laptops, it's at home, it's on their home PCs, it's on the road, it's on their mobile phones. And now we've got the cloud to deal with as well, with all the movement to cloud and the cloud analytics platforms. So data is basically everywhere now. So it's no longer easy just to protect the crown jewels. So that definitely is still a priority and become infinitely more difficult. But data privacy now has come into play, and that's been a bit of a sticky wicket, and I'll kind of talk on that here in a moment. And again, we already talked a little bit about this, right? Is that, you know, the world's changed. I mean, let's face it. And so it's not going to change back anytime soon. And even if it does, you know, we at Microfocus have been told that it's not going to be like it was. And so they've obviously are shifting their strategy on how they manage their workforce and their locations and those type of things. So, you know, we've seen, as you guys know, I'm sure vividly aware of in the news, with all the various data breaches that have been going on and all, you know, this has been a field day for the hacker community out there, to go out and say, well, now I don't no longer have to break into these, multiple defense layers around a particular set of data. Now it's a whole lot easier on how to do this. And so, the hacker community has somewhat thrived in this type of environment. So I always like to share this slide in these type of context presentations. And this slide in particular, I know this is actually a little bit dated, but I like this one because it's personal, and I'll tell you why. So this is from a site called Information is Beautiful. They have some great visualizations, not only on data breaches and things of that nature, but also on a whole lot of other kind of capabilities and topics as well. And so the reason this one is so personal to me is there is kind of a big bubble there in the middle, where I had been notified of a particular breach around that particular bubble. And this is back actually, again, 2000, early 2000, I was flying around, and I was actually on an airplane filling out the paperwork around this particular breach to receive whatever compensation they were going to offer around that particular data breach. And so as I finished the paperwork and hit the submit button and my email synced, I got another email from another bubble a little bit to the left of that particular bubble from my credit card company that said that they had had a data breach, and here's all the process to go fill out the paperwork for that. So, it was really that point in time I realized that, what, and you guys have heard this, it's not a matter of if anymore, it's when. It's when it's going to happen. And so there's a long laundry list of people that, have data breaches, that have reached out to organizations such as ourselves. And it's a difficult thing for them to talk about, right? Because nobody wants to talk about how they've been, victimized or how vulnerable they are or things like that. So, only, the stuff you see in the news, like the pipeline incident here recently, are only things that, can't be hidden, so to speak, right? But when you talk to, the average company and the average CISO, they experience these type of breaches very often, and so they have to deal with them and that type of thing. Does that make sense to everybody so far? I'll take silence as a yes.
Yes.
All right, so this is also kind of an interesting, because this also leads into kind of that data privacy piece of it as well. So if breaches are imminent and you're gonna have issues around that, well, what data are you managing and why, and what's the perception of that data? And I found this slide kind of fascinating because, we think about this, and actually I make the joke all the time, about us, that I was talking to my wife about, how I think the internet's spying on me and that type of stuff. And I always joke and say, that at that point, Alexa laughed, the other one laughed, whatever her name is. And the refrigerator kind of joined in on the front, right? And so when you start thinking about all these internet connected devices out there, and I'm sure we have all experienced this, where, for example, I've had a conversation of my wife, talking about, wouldn't it be nice to get away for this weekend? And all of a sudden on my Facebook feed, there's like 8,000 vacation destinations that mysteriously pop up, right? But no, they're not listening to us at all, right? And so, those are the things that, concern a lot of the average people and stuff. And of course, most of us know as well that a lot of times when you go to these particular services or sites or those type of things, that, there's little cookies that pop up and say, we're going to do these things to track you and all that type of stuff. Is that okay or not? And so, the majority of time we have to say okay, or really not get the experience that we need to get from that particular site. So there's a high degree of paranoia out there in the market that has filtered up now to the legislative bodies, and now the legislatures are getting involved in that process as well. And the reason for this is it's all about the data, right? I'm sure you guys kind of have some insights around this as well, is that the business value of data is tremendous. I think when you look at a lot of organizations, matter of fact, I was having a conversation with somebody earlier this week, that was basically sharing, because we were talking about Amazon, right? And I remember Amazon as this little online book company that at the time felt kind of shady, right? I mean, my oldest daughter, who's now, I don't know, 30 something, 34, somewhere in there, when she was getting ready for high school and college, I remember going out on Amazon and buying, when it first came out, and buying her textbooks there rather than from the college bookstore. And I was all nervous about, buying from a little company nobody's ever heard of off the internet, right? And it seemed so weird back then. And now look what Amazon has become. And I think of, Amazon as this big global retailer, because they show up at my house every day because we can't apparently get to the store apparently. So, Prime is basically at my house every day. But, really, when you think about it and when you dig down on some of the numbers, a lot of Amazon profits are not from the retailing business, however robust it is and has become over the last 2 years. A huge chunk of their revenue stream comes from the business of selling data and data about you. So that's the thing, is data is very valuable these days. We all have seen the cases around Facebook and some of the court cases around them sharing information and things like that as well. But information is king these days. And so protecting that information and controlling that has concerned a lot of legislators. To the point where when you look at a lot of the legislative bodies that have been or up and coming out there, here in let's start in Europe, right? A lot of it seems, a lot of people view GDPR as kind of the first instantiation of data privacy and protection laws. And, very quickly over here, California followed with CCPA, which is the California Consumer Protection Act, and it was followed up by a revision called CPRA or CRPA, one of the two. And so that essentially has set some standards here in the US for how, folks can, manage information, how they have to treat information, what's the purpose of their, information and so on. And I'll get into that here in a moment, right? But, it's kind of set the standards. And now there's just a laundry list of states behind that are now looking to enforce very similar laws. But interestingly enough, when I first started talking to senior executives at companies about CCPA, if they weren't a California-based company, there was a lot of, well, that really doesn't affect us. Like, well, it kind of does, right? And so if you think about, certainly, I mean, the no-brainer ones are the retailers, right? Like the Limited Brands, Tapestry, a lot of those type of retail companies that have California-based consumers. I mean, that seems to make sense. But even still, if you run a small clinic in South Dakota and a resident of California comes through your door, slips and falls and has an issue or just coming in sick, and you take their personal information, according to California, now this could be contested for sure, but according to California, that's an issue, right? And so you fall under their jurisdiction from their point of view. Again, whether that would actually hold up in a legal court or not, or whether people would bother or not, is a different issue. But the point is more and more people here recently have found out that they are under the guidance of CCPA and that they do have to take note of it and manage the information around that. Some of these legislations are getting actually pretty sticky, right? Let's look at KVKK, which is the Turkish privacy laws. In addition to, both GDPR and CCPA have pretty hefty fines associated with them. And by the way, I did recently write a blog. It hasn't been published just yet. So Tanisha, I'll forward that to you when it gets published here, probably next week, where I talked about CCPA enforcement, because State of California Attorney General's Office came out just a couple weeks ago with a first year enforcement report card, so to speak, right? And so they talked about in pretty deep depth in two different articles or press releases The first one talked just general statistics around, the enforcement, the things of the nature, why they're enforcing the industries. But then there's a deeper link that you can follow where they actually talk about 42, I think, use cases across multiple industries, some that you would not even think of, where there have been breaches, or not breaches, but issues following the CCPA guidelines and requirements and so on. So a very interesting article, but I do have a blog that's coming out next week, so I'll share that link with you guys so you can go take a look at it. But it kind of summarizes, what's happened there and where the enforcement, so that you don't have to kind of dig down to try to find that information. But back to KVKK. KVKK for Turkey has some pretty hefty fines associated with them, even in relationship to GDPR and CCPA, but it doesn't stop there. So guess what? If you're a senior executive and you knowingly fault or fail to follow the data privacy guidelines, guess what? You can go to jail, right? So think about that. You as an IT professional or an IT senior leader can go to jail because you did not follow proper data privacy guidelines. And so what's interesting is it'll be interesting to see how some of these other jurisdictions come along, and even here at the US federal level, when we decide to kind of enact some guidance there, how strongly that will be enforceable going forward. And so those are some of the things to think about, is that as we go forward, it's not going to get any easier or lighter. It's only going to get more stricter going forward. And it'll be interesting to see if, Turkey and KVKK is kind of the bar that everybody's going to be eventually going to, right? Any questions before we move on? Cool.
I was going to say, so it really just comes down to like everyone has to basically enforce, like even the California, because like I'll see that at the bottom of like, for example, Amazon or Lowe's or, whoever, even if they're not based in California, just based off of what happens if they don't adhere to it, right?
That's correct. So, and where most companies are at, right? Because here's California's perspective. California's perspective is if any of their citizens have their data anywhere, they claim jurisdiction over it, right? Which again, legally, I think can be challenged, but you as a business entity have to wonder that, if you have California-based consumers in any way, shape, or form, and what volume of that will kind of dictate, I think, or give guidance to your legal community how to move forward for that. So it's not one of those things you can dismiss entirely, but it is something that the legal compliance officers in a corporation need to discuss and understand what their exposure level is. Again, I think that the retail, grocery chain, type of entities where, while they may not be a California-based business or even have storefronts in California, but if they have an online presence, for example, and have California residents, then they have to, consider that. Let me give a concrete example. So we worked with a company called The Limited about 2 years ago. And, most of you know The Limited, maybe not by that brand name, but Victoria's Secret, Bed Bath & Beyond, and those, Bath and Body Works, sorry, as well as a few of those other name brands as well. So, we had a lot of discussions with them around data privacy. And while they used CCPA as a hammer to fund the project around data privacy, their point of view was they did not want to chase specific requirements. They viewed their brand in particular as being, around Victoria's Secret, that, it's a very private experience in general. So privacy is very important to them as a corporation. So rather than chase a specific requirement like CCPA or GDPR, they wanted to have an overarching data privacy strategy so that any regulation that comes along after it, even if it's slightly different or slightly managed, is kind of still covered under that data privacy umbrella. Does that make sense, Tanisha?
Yeah, I got you.
Cool. Any other questions? Oh, I see some chat. I guess let me pop there real quick. Yes, great info. Thank you. Always good to get good feedback.
Yeah,
All right.
I was saying yes about the fact that I remember I'm old enough to have used Amazon for, as a bookseller, when I was going into college. So like I remember, that very well, how they just went from, just books to now basically everything.
Isn't that just a crazy thought? But interesting. And so, not just retailing, right? But when you think about the, AWS platform and the selling of data information and so forth, and all the different revenue streams they have, when you look at where everything they have their tendrils in, is a bit disturbing in a lot of ways, right? But nonetheless, it is what it is. So now, I'm going to talk about this a little bit. What's interesting is, having worked a number of these data privacy and protection projects, why are they so hard? It's the reasoning is it touches so many things, right? When you look at your traditional IT project, let's take I wish I had included this one slide now because it shows it so well. But you think about something like identity management. Yeah, identity management's a big project, but it touches a certain areas. Yeah, okay, it makes sense. Well, let's look at application security. Yeah, that touches our development community, our QA community, some of our security community. Okay, yeah. But the point is, and I have this one slide, it's kind of like a subway map or a tube map in the UK, where you have all these lines of information and stops along the way, which represent all these what used to seemingly be disparate projects in IT. Why is data privacy so hard? Well, data privacy kind of is at the nexus center, or the central stop and location for all these data lines and all these projects, because all these projects tend to fall under, in some respect, data privacy and protection. And it touches so many people and so many personas within an organization. You don't know who's really leading the thing, right? A lot of times I think it's really as simple as the CIO or CISO, gets a hot potato and throws it to somebody. And whoever that somebody is who catches it is the one who ends up with the budget and the project. Because I've seen it come out of compliance. I've seen it come out of architecture. I've seen it come out of security. I've seen it come out of enterprise architecture, chief data privacy officer, the legal community. And so, where these projects actually end up and how they get funded, first of all, is very confusing. And so, it's kind of like one of those things, who's in charge, who's got the ball, and who's running with it. And then secondly, even at the end of the day, all those people got to kind of come together and work together. And it's really interesting because I can't even begin to tell you how many meetings I've had where we have brought all these personas together. And for the first time, you hear one group saying like, or you'd hear us saying like, here's what we need to do in the future to help you be compliant. And you'd hear one group say, well, we were told we never can have that. And you'd have the other group saying like, you can have that. And so, here were years and years of yes, you can, no, you can't mentality, all of a sudden getting broken down because they're in the same room together and having to discuss a common goal together. So it's really kind of fascinating to do that. A lot of times as well, IT, a lot of times in these cases want to do their own thing as well. And when you get to compliance and legal and all those people involved, kind of a magic happens, so to speak. And they kind of come together almost in a kumbaya moment to say, hey, this is great. I see everybody's involved here. I see everything needs to get done, and it's not easy. It's a lot of work across a lot of disciplines. But at the end of the day, it's for a really good goal. And so a lot of times when you get over that initial hump of people realizing that, hey, a lot of people's got to get involved, a lot of people's got to get aboard. You either got to get on the bus or off the bus. Once everybody's on the bus, beautiful things do happen from there. One interesting side note I'm going to talk about for a moment. Actually, let me address this question real quick. Okay, so actually that's a great point. Let's cover that for a moment as well. So before we kind of move into this, so his question was, what determines where a customer resides and what jurisdiction he falls under? That's really an interesting question, right? I don't think it's been tested in court yet. But again, let me refresh what California's viewpoint is if you live in California, you are governed by their regulations. And even if you travel to other jurisdictions, their viewpoint is that you are still under their jurisdiction. So that means if you go to a clinic in South Dakota and you're sick and you check in and give them all your privacy information, at least California's point of view is that business entity falls under the guidelines of California Consumer Privacy Protection Act. So it's not, so again, where you work wouldn't necessarily affect that as well, but I guess you could be a Nevada resident who works in California. That information would be protected because the information sits in California. So it's kind of a little bit, again, hasn't been tested in court, but I would make the assumption that at least in California's case, if you work, reside, touch, do anything in California that relates to privacy information, they're going to try to claim some kind of ownership over that process. And so as the other states come online, again, this will become a little bit more muddied. And certainly at a federal level, if they put something into a place, then what takes precedence at that point, CCPA or federal mandates and so on. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all folds out at the end of the day. So let me take one specific use case around data privacy and how it affects your normal IT operations, right? Here's test data management. Test data management is not a new topic. So let me kind of just share test data management for if there's anybody not familiar with it, right? But as a developer and being a developer in a past life, whenever I was working on an application, obviously you can't work against production. So you need to work against a non-prod type data set, dev, test, QA, training, education. I mean, there's a whole laundry list of things out there. And so how do you create those data sets? Well, when test data management first came along, the concept was, wouldn't it be nice to have a process to create test databases, right? And so first of all, let's make them smaller, and then let's protect all the information in there that's maybe privacy related. And so this problem was solved 20 years ago. Matter of fact, when I first started with the company that we eventually acquired here, that was one of the products we sold, was a test data management solution. And so the market solved this problem 2 years ago, but how did they solve it? They said, okay, well, right now it's just me as a DBA, Eric, and I'm working with Susie, the quality assurance person, and the developer, Jose. I've got all these people, we're all in IT and we're all friends, right? And so we could go buy this, relatively expensive solution to do all these elegant things of creating smaller data sets and to go ahead and protect that data. But you know what? We're all IT. We're all within that four walls. So let's just copy prod and move it down. Maybe we'll scramble a few things or obfuscate a few things, which causes some other problems when you're trying to do testing. But let's make it easy. Let's take the safe path, the simple path, the path of least resistance. And so that's what many people did that didn't buy test data management solutions back 20 years ago. They took a faster, easier, less resistance path to solving test data management. Well, now when you look at, sorry, I'm missing a slide. All right, hold on, sorry. Oh, sorry, it is here. So now, I guess I had my slides out of order. So why is test data a problem, right? Well, if you have a production database and you have DR, warehouses, test data, quality assurance, training, integration, so on, daily, weekly, monthly backups, and you have sensitive data there, guess what? You could potentially have sensitive data all over the place. And that's a nasty problem as opposed to just having it, in one place. So, why is this important now? Well, now, before there was no stick, right? There was just the carrot. And so you had this nice little carrot that said, hey, if you do these things, you'll have a really great process and you'll be able to do all these cool things. But there was no stick. So, me, Susie, and Jose, we all said, you know what, man, let's do it this way. And look at this problem we've now created. Well, now with data privacy regulations and data breaches happening more from the insider point of view as opposed to the outside players, this is a problem. And so many of the breaches that you see here are actually happening internally, and they are getting sensitive information from these non-production copies. Now, here's what's interesting, because I actually had to do this for an article I wrote about 3 months ago in Tech Beacon. I can also forward that link if you guys are interested. But when I did the research on this, I thought, you know what, I'm going to kind of Google around and see how many data breaches were caused by test data management or non-production databases. What's interesting is there isn't a lot of entries there that spell that out, right? They don't say somebody got our development copy database and pilfered it, right? They don't say that. Why? That's a vulnerability. That's admitting fault, right? So they don't run to do that. Every now and then you'll see. So when I kind of looked at it, about 100 plus cases of data breaches. Maybe 3 or 4 of them talked about production systems or data in transit, or they specified very specific reasons why and what was pilfered and how. The bulk of them were not. But what's interesting is they did. If you read deep enough, you found that it was things like a developer was at fault, or a test database had got, they didn't even call it test, a database had been pilfered, or a marketing copy, but you'd hear all these kind of terms that basically said, yeah, it was non-prod. And so when you think about most people, they're trying to protect the crown jewels. They're thinking I got to protect production, but they don't think about the downstream issues. So now an age-old problem that IT solved 20 years ago is a major problem again. And so a lot of people are having to kind of scramble a bit. And there is a significantly high interest in secure and compliant test data management now than there was in the past 15 years. It's been crazy how here in just the last couple months, people want to talk about this particular topic. So let me talk about.
So quick question.
Of course.
Is the non-prod data they're getting, was it anonymized, or did they just copy over prod data and they're basically just using a duplicate of production? So like production like is what we typically used to call it. But
sure. So that's a good question. So let me answer it this way. There's no one formula that anybody's been following. It's kind of been your own choice. It actually is shocking to me how many people are doing production copies of data and not anonymizing the content. So I'll make that statement first. Now, the smart ones who said, yeah, we got to anonymize the content or do something with the content, will take one of two paths. One, they'll talk about that they anonymize, but they do it in such a way like it's almost like obfuscation, right? They either exit out or make it a random number or things like that. Well, the problem when you make a credit card a random number, it doesn't pass validation in the applications, right? And so me as an application developer having to debug an issue caused by bad test data as opposed to my application working or not is very frustrating, and it causes a wedge between development and security. So there's a lot of folks that kind of take that path. There are the other side of it is, do you really know where your sensitive data is? And here's a statement that I'll leave with you that I ask every senior executive that I talked to over the past, I don't know, 6-7 years now, since data privacy started coming around. I ask them point blank, a senior executive, do you know where all your sensitive data is? The large percentage of them will say, absolutely, we do. It's in our CRM system, our customer relationship management system. It's in our ERP, enterprise resource planning system. It's in our billing system, right? They'll name off these 4 or 5 databases that is kind of the core key business aspect. And so they'll name those things off. And I'm like, great. Have you thought about are there applications that feed those core applications? Yes, there is. Are there applications that feed off of those applications? Absolutely, there are. Are there marketing systems and fringe IT organizations, or what we call closet IT organizations, fringe marketing systems, all these type of things out there? Like, yeah. And I'm just like, do you know across that spectrum we just talked about, do you know where all the sensitive content is there? And I will tell you that 98% of the people or so begin to feel like, well, now I'm not so sure. And so that's the trick, right? So there are people that are doing programs to create test data management. There are people that are anonymizing content, but do you really know what you don't know? And so that's kind of a key component of this. So that was actually a good lead in, Tanisha. I appreciate that. Because when we look at resilient programs and particularly around data privacy and protection, understanding and protecting your data is kind of a key piece of this, right? You have to be able to, really know what you don't know, and across the board, because when you look at a lot of these privacy regulations, they don't necessarily care, right? That where your production data is, and where your sensitive data is in these 4 or 5 core applications. They care that where all of your data is. And as a matter of fact, I, as a citizen, for example, can call in and basically I can make 3 phone calls at least, right? Phone call number 1 to an entity that's covered by a regulation to say, hey, I'm Eric Popeil. What sensitive data are you keeping? And you actually get all these stuff already, right? You get emails and paper mail about these data privacy protection things all the time. A company has to be able to say, what data they're keeping and for what purpose they are keeping that data. And purpose is very important in this equation, because a lot of these regulations basically say you just can't keep data to keep data. You've got to have a purpose that makes sense for keeping that specific piece of data, and you have to track and document that. So I, as a consumer, can say, hey, I want to know what personal data you're keeping. And they have to be able to respond to me and say, oh, we're keeping social security number for this purpose. We're keeping email address for that purpose, and so on. I can call back a second time and say, hey, this is Eric again. What data? That's cool. But what data do you have specifically on Eric Popeil? Now, that's not saying what information in your 5 core systems do you have on Eric Popeil. That means across every piece of content in your organization. Wow, somebody's drawing on my screen. Across every piece of content, you have to be able to say, well, Eric, we've got your social security number in these 3 systems as 1, 2, 3. We actually have several different email addresses for you in different upstream, downstream, and marketing applications as 1, 2, 3, and so on. And so when you think about that, and this also not only spans structured content, but this spans unstructured content, semi-structured content, big data analytics platforms, cloud analytic platforms. I mean, basically any data that this corporation is responsible for, or entity is responsible for, falls under that jurisdiction, that they have to be able to tell me everything they have on Eric Popeil. Now, a lot of these regulations have provisions for that next step, which is, hey, this is Eric again. Appreciate you guys. How about you guys just forget all about me, right? Now, this is a right to be forgotten. This is an interesting topic because legal communities view this in a lot of different ways. If you think about it, what that really means, that a lot of people interpreted this as a hard delete in the beginning. And then some people viewed that as, well, it doesn't necessarily have to be a hard delete. It could be an obfuscation as long as we de-identify those individuals from the data, but we still can maintain the data for analytics purposes. And then you have the third group of people that say, well, you know what, that's in direct conflict with my other regulations by either SEC or FINRA or Federal Communications, FCC, or someone like that. For example, if somebody says, I want to be forgotten in the telecom space, well, that's all wonderful. except that the FCC says you need to maintain the cell phone traffic for a particular individual for so many years, right? So again, a lot of this hasn't necessarily been tested in court. A lot of people are staking their poles in the ground and saying this is how it's going to be, but some of them are actually in direct conflict with each other as well. But the point of this slide, and really I want to share this, is that there, part of the, when you look at a cyber resilient program across your entire IT enterprise and landscape, understanding and protecting your data is a key tenet of that, and being able to know what you don't know. Let's see here. All right. Okay, so when we look at data privacy and protection, there's a couple, if we peel back the onion a little bit, there's really kind of a couple major tenets. I think I already kind of beat the drum on the data discovery side pretty heavily, but again, that's really where most people start in this journey, is trying to figure out and know what I don't know. There is actually a surprisingly number of senior executives that when I do ask that question, do you know where your sensitive content is? A shockingly percentage of them will say, no, we don't. And I'm like, wow, okay, really? That's kind of crazy, right? Don't you think? But they'll say, yeah, that's kind of just, unfortunately, that's the state of the world, so to speak. And so I'll talk about, well, we need to go out and identify these databases and see what's in them, right? Then that makes sense to you, or repositories. And they'll be like, we don't even know where the repositories are. So you'll find people in various stages of this kind of process, but at the end of the day, creating that data inventory is really key to understanding this process. And then not only understanding, or hunting down and finding what content is sensitive. Now, understand sensitive content, and actually, Tanisha, this goes back a little bit to your earlier question too, is aren't people anonymizing this? Understand the scope of personal information has expanded since, back in the day where you said, oh yeah, social security number, that makes sense, right? Credit card number, yeah, that makes sense. Well, now things like email addresses are considered personal information, and other tidbits. It's again, it's anything that can be viewed as tieable to a particular individual could be considered, personal information. But sensitive information isn't just that either. Think about in the, anybody who does anything with the military exportation market, and they have to deal with ITAR data, which is basically, making sure that anything that has to do with this particular widget that can be used, in a tank, even though it's not really a tank widget, it could be used in a tank widget, it might have to be tracked as ITAR data or considered sensitive content. Do you know where all that is? Well, it could be in a structured database, it could be in an unstructured database, it could be in SharePoint, right? Who knows? It could be in Hadoop, right? So understanding where all that is and being able to, surface that for regulatory purposes is important. The other side of it is not just important to know what sensitive content is where, but have some insights into it, right? So understanding contextually what these things are. So having the machine learning and analytics portion of this tying into this, of being able to say, hey, I pointed at this repository and I found 100 documents. They don't look anything alike. They're not formatted the same. They don't exactly even use the same verbiage. But at the end of the day, the context as taken as a whole with those documents look like they're all business contracts for a specific purpose. So how do you find and group those so that you can then make decisions about what to do with those things? And that basically kind of falls in the next three lines there is, do you make decisions to apply policy to the data? Do you make decisions to apply protection to the data? Do you apply processes to manage the data through a life cycle or a retention management strategy or a defensible deletion strategy? And of course, the best form of protection at the end of the day, right, is data minimization or defensible deletion. If you don't have the data, it can't be stolen, right? So a lot of companies over retain content as well. So a lot of these core key capabilities are kind of important in that data protection, privacy and protection strategy of going all the way from the beginning of the life cycle, understanding what you need to know, having a deep understanding of what those things are and what you need to do with them, and then making decisions on how you want to remediate that process, whether you want to push it through a data management or governance strategy, whether you're monitoring how it's being used or through a data protection capability such as things like format preserving encryption, tokenization, and so on. Make sense? This is basic. Yep, this is basically the same thing from a different viewpoint. And the reason I include this slide and talk to this slide a lot of time with senior executives, because this is the way the analysts kind of put it, right? So if I go back, this is the way how a lot of the vendors will portray, right? What data privacy and protection look like. And this is how the analysts will portray what data privacy and protection look like. Why? I don't know, but that's just how things are. So I like to talk about this kind of process as well. It's essentially the same thing, identifying your data sources, doing discovery on your data sources, understanding what data is regulated, not regulated, ITAR related, personal data, valuable, not valuable, whatever. But at the end of the day, you need to have that capability to create a data dictionary or data inventory. Sometimes those terms are interchangeable. Data tagging is also another core key capability. Sometimes that you'll hear it referred in the industry as correlation of content. And what that really means at the end of the day is, remember that second time where I said, hey, I'm Eric Popeil, I want to know specifically what you have of mine. Well, that data tagging correlation capability is essentially, here's an entity such as Eric Popeil, and here's all the elements in our organization that are tagged as Eric Popeil's elements. So that if I call in and say, show me all my stuff, you do a simple query through the tagging mechanisms to say, here's everything in our corporate world or business entity or whatever, where Eric Popeil has content in it. So that's kind of a very key port capability there as well that you need. Then, of course, here's the big trick in the market, folks, right? Because when this data privacy and protection really started taking hold with CCPA, there's a bazillion companies out there that came out with data discovery tools, right? And so it was kind of like the hot thing to go do. Hey, let's create a startup and let's go build some data, discovery capabilities. And you'll find a lot of these, like if you Google data discovery, you'll probably see a bazillion vendors out there. And what's interesting is they'll either work on structured content like databases, or they'll work on unstructured content. So you'll find very, very few that actually cover the spectrum across all types of data. That's the first point. The second point is these all were pop-ups that just decided to do this one day. When you look at their technologies and take it underneath the cover, they have a really cool looking car. But when you pop open the hood, you'll find a couple mice and a wheel in there. And so they're not enterprise class. So when, when you're talking about, like, again, the limited that had 100 terabyte database of like 200 billion rows or something like that needed to be examined, 99% of these solutions aren't going to be able to scale. And then when you say that, well, that's just one database inside of there. So how do you, scale across, hundreds, if not thousands of databases, like in the case of GM or somebody like that? So, that's kind of the key capability. Now, having said all that, let's just argue for a moment and say, okay, you bought them and you're good, and now you know where your stuff is. The real disconnect in the market is then what I call okay, cool, now what? Well, we hadn't really thought about that yet. Yep, that's going to be your problem, because most of these solutions out in the market space, they really don't connect to say, okay, well, now we need to act, document, secure, monitor, and remediate these problems. We have to be able to apply policy. We may have to quarantine content. We have to dispose of content. We have to maybe put legal holds on content. What about lifecycle management concepts such as archiving, preserving, and so on, retention management? How do you protect that content? Well, if it's structured content, how do you encrypt, tokenize? If it's unstructured content, how do you redact? How do you secure it as well and encrypt it? So those technologies are, somewhat different in the structured and unstructured worlds, and being able to kind of tie all those together. And now it's even being tied more closely to some other disciplines inside of IT, such as we already talked about test data management. Ties very closely to application security, for example, and things like tools that are used over there to do discovery and management of security vulnerabilities. In the identity access management world, there's a new term coming up called CIAM, C-A-I-M or C-I-A-M, one of the two. But essentially, it's the marriage of identity access management for consumers or citizens, and tying that together with identity management and data privacy and purpose of data and so on. So a lot of these disciplines are coming together very, very quickly, and crossing disciplines across all of IT, as you'll see here on the left. And then the last piece is, how do you remediate the content? How do you report back to the regulatory bodies that you're actually doing the things that they asked you to do? How do you dispose of information in the case of a right to be forgotten scenario? How do you manage data subject rights requests, which was all those times Eric was calling in for various reasons? How do you manage those processes and fulfill those processes as well with across all of these things? So, these are things that you need to think about. And when you're putting together a data privacy framework or strategy, and this is why it crosses so many disciplines and why it's a little bit of a challenge to get everybody in the same room to have these very difficult and challenging conversations. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes, sir.
All right, so we only have about 5 minutes left. So again, discover is kind of a key. We already talked about that. So let me kind of just finish up on this slide a little bit. So a lot of these so let me actually make 2 statements here. One of them is, what's interesting about data privacy is it's a new enough discipline inside of IT that everybody wants to talk about it, right? When you talk about things like identity management, it's been around a while. So it's not really, people don't want to stop by the coffee cup thingy, coffee pot, sorry, or the water cooler. I was actually trying to cross-member those 2 things. And so it's not something that people like to gather around and chit chat about, or application security. Yeah, been around forever. Things like security operations, SIM systems. Yeah, cool things happening there, but still, it's old stuff, right? It's been around a while. Data privacy protection is a really interesting market that you literally can go out to a lot of the social media platforms, LinkedIn or so on, whatever. And you can find individuals that have either an IAPP certification, which is Industry Association of Privacy Professionals, or a CIPP/US certification, certified, I don't know, privacy professional. It is certified industry privacy professional /US means for US regulations. You can go find any of these people and say, hey, you want to chat about data privacy? Shockingly, they all go like, absolutely. So, it's very easy to create, group and mass around this to have discussion with your peers. And everybody's trying to figure this out together, right? So it is really kind of cool to have kind of that social aspect to it across different industry groups and different disciplines and different geographies, et cetera. There's a number of groups out there as well that support this, but it's all, at the end of the day, it's all a journey. Where are you at? Do you understand your risk and where it's at? How do we manage that information, and how do we map to, if we're mapping to a specific compliance, or how do we map to a broad umbrella of privacy requirements? It's a journey, and it's not something that you buy one thing and say, yep, we've solved all our GDPR problems, which again is another thing. If you Google GDPR, CCPA, you'll see that there's a number of vendors out there that say, yeah, buy us and we solve that problem. No, they don't. They solve 10% of the problem, right? So it's a fairly significant project. It's a fairly significant process, and it's a significant journey. So understanding where you're at and where you're wanting to go is kind of be important. So kind of the takeaways for today is, data privacy regulations aren't going away. They're only going to get worse. They're only going to get tighter. The penalties are only going to get higher. We all have seen over the last couple months here, over the last 18, 20 months or so, how cybersecurity events are bubbling up, and now they're becoming national security issues as well. You need a complete strategy from front to back. It's not something you can knee-jerk a reaction to say, hey, let's go do this and we're compliant. No, it doesn't work like that. you got to consider multiple aspects of this across multiple disciplines. And so you really do need to manage that, or have at least thought process around how you're going to deal with that, all the way from inception of data all the way through the remediation or quite frankly, the death of the data as it goes through and so on. So that's kind of what I wanted to leave you today. I hope that was helpful. We'll check the chat here for a question or two. I know we have about 2 or 3 minutes left. Let me see here. Let's see. Siam. So yes, Siam is correct. I think SIM, yes, is correct. Is basically a security operations concept for usually called SIM systems. They're usually software packages to monitor breach activity into an organization. Thank you, Quinana.
But the thing that you were talking about was the CIAM, you said?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yep. And actually, if you give me just 1 second, I'll double, triple verify that just so I don't give you all bad information. Because as I am getting old, so sometimes I don't quite get things quite right. Yeah, it's CIAM. And so that's, again, stands for either consumer or citizen identity and access management. Again, it's kind of an extension of the identity and access management world. But usually identity and access management typically, historically, has been more focused around employees. Now, certainly over the last few years, it's been expanded to include all entities. For example, Volkswagen has where every vehicle that comes off the line is its own unique identity to be tracked and managed, and permissions that it has managed, because a lot of these are now smart cars, right? So there's a lot of interesting things to worry about there. But now around this particular piece, because when you talk about Volkswagens, right? Volkswagens don't have rights, right? They don't have personal information about them that, that they can, bring litigation about for. So now that you're dealing with citizens and consumers that now have, very similar rights and access privileges to employees, this new market, if you will, called SIAM, is really taking hold, where again, it's a merger of your historical identity and access management and the data privacy and protection concepts, and particularly purpose of data and why you're keeping it, are all married and tied together. So something definitely to watch as you go forward here. And I assume that my viewpoint is here in the next 12 months, you'll hear about it significantly in a lot of different organizations. So I hope today was helpful. Please let me know if there's any other kind of information. As I shared, I'll pass a couple links along to Tanisha that she can share if she desires. And then if there's any questions at all, always feel free to reach out to me. I can be found on LinkedIn under Eric Popiel, P-O-P-I-E-L. I can also be found here at eric.popiel@microfocus.com. So that's all I had, Tanisha.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming out here. Does anyone have any questions? I guess real quick, we are a little bit over time, and I want to be respectful that people have, are on their lunch break. Any quick questions? No? All right. Well, thank you, Eric. We appreciate you as always for coming out and hanging out with us. And I'll look forward to those links so I can share them with them. Absolutely. You guys have a great weekend and enjoy all this lovely fall weather. All right, great. Thank you so much. Have a good day.